Welcome to the CFL Outsider, a short series of totally impartial hot takes, odd takes, and generally unconventional opinions on the CFL and Canadian football, with your host and presenter, Old Man Shouting at Clouds.
Welcome to a special bonus episode of the CFL Outsider. I remain, as always, your 100% unbiased, completely impartial, helpful, and very excited host and presenter, Old Man Shouting at Clouds. Helpful? Well, because the CFL Draft is coming up, and it's become rather apparent to this old man that you have to have gone a fair ways down the rabbit hole of CFL fandom to have much interest or understanding of the draft. So I decided to put together a quick primer here for anyone who is interested. I'm not going to be talking about the specifics of this year's draft and who's in it and who the prospects are or anything like that. No, there's lots of people doing that. This is just a short overview of the process and why it is so different from the NFL draft. Why it isn't as exciting and all of that. It's not just because it's a smaller league. And speaking of exciting, why am I excited? Well, because I know something you don't. We did a lot of self-scouting here at the CFL Outsider during the off-season. Took a look at just about everything, put a critical lens on and what was working, what wasn't, and whatnot. We think we've come up with sort of what was enjoyed, what people want us to keep, but also a lot of stuff a lot of amazing new ideas. And we're going to spring that on you probably for the first preseason games, but we'll see how it all turns out there. Make sure you've subscribed so you don't miss any of that. We may do some other stuff coming up to the preseason as well. So the draft process that we're here to talk about today, though, it starts with the CFL Invitational Combine, which is basically an open combine, not an invitational one. But anyway, again, CFL, don't worry about that. It already happened. It was at the University of Waterloo on February 28th. Now, some players from that will have been selected to move on and join others that were already selected to what is the CFL Combine, which actually is invitational. But anyway, that goes March 21st to 23rd in Regina. And then on April 29th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the draft begins, an 8-round draft. In each round, the team with the worst record from the previous season drafts first, and then they work through the rest of the 9 teams in reverse order of how they finished. So that's it. Done and dusted, right? Easy to understand. Except the CFL draft is unique in basically any pro sports leagues. And that's because there's the national ratio in the CFL. National player ratio. There has to be a certain number of Canadian players on the teams. On each game day, a team fields a 45-man roster. And that 45-man roster has 3 quarterbacks who can have any nationality. It really doesn't matter. They also, of the remaining players, have to have at least 21 nationals, which are what they call Canadians now. At least 1 global player who's not a Canadian and not an American. And a maximum of 19 Americans. Now, 7 of those nationals, those Canadians, have to be part of the starting 24 players on either offense or defense and stay on the field. There has to be the 7 players on the field throughout the game on every play. And that's all exactly how it goes, except when they dress a 44-man roster. But again, CFL, they can't make it easy. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because, like I said, it makes the CFL draft unique. In any other sport, teams drafting in the top round, maybe even the top 2 or 3 rounds, they're looking for players that are going to challenge for day 1 starting spots with their team that year, their draft year. In the NFL, it's often these quarterbacks that have all the hype behind them. So there's all this glitz and glamour and who's going to be the starter for this team next year and everything. And it's very much exciting. In the CFL draft, the teams aren't looking for players who are going to be day 1 starters for them, or even, frankly, year 1 starters. If you get one, that's great. But that's not what you're looking for. Anybody who's good enough to be that has probably already been drafted in the NFL or signed on a undrafted free agent contract down in the NFL. So you're not going to see them for a year or two. So those good players may get drafted, but they drop down to the 7th or 8th round because you're hoping on that maybe they'll come back and play the CFL at some point. Generally, most of them don't seem to. So the focus of the CFL draft isn't to find that next year starter, that surprise talent that's going to come out of the gate and wow everybody. It's about restocking that pool of Canadian talent, of good solid Canadian players. Having the best Canadian talent in the league wins games, wins championships. If you look, the teams that draft well year after year are always in the top contenders. So that's what you're doing here in the draft. You're getting the players who are going to come into the practice squad. Anyway, because see, what happens as well, you've got that good enough Canadians to support those 21, 22 starters that you have, or 21, 22 players on the roster and 7 starters. But every year, some of them age out. They get a little old for the game. Some of them, never really develop the way they expected to when they were drafted. So they fall by the wayside. Some of them just decide they're going to retire because they can make more money than playing in the CFL, which is unfortunate, but it's true these days for some of them, especially if they've come out with good degrees. And frankly, some of them, the really good ones, like a Joe, like I mentioned, they go down south. So you've got to replace those positions. And that's what the teams are looking for in the CFL draft. They're looking for players that can develop over 2 or 3 years. They can put them on the practice squad, probably some of them. Some will be special teams players at the start of the season. And as they come along, they'll either move off the practice squad onto special teams, and some of them, the better ones, will move from special teams up and become rotational players on the offense or defense as well. And that's where most of them will spend their careers, frankly. Now, the top talent, the ones that are really good, will advance through that rotational process and become your 7 starters or more maybe when you need. Sometimes a team gets lucky. They find a player who really overperforms and ends up starting during his first year. It does come along, but that's not the focus of it. If at the end of training camp, all your draft picks are either on the practice squad or on the game day roster playing special teams, that's a successful drafting year. And that's why it's so hard to get CFL fans excited about the draft, because, hey, yippee, look who we got. He's a player who's, if things go really good, he could, in 2 or 3 or 4 years, could, maybe be like a star. And yeah, it's not like the NFL draft where if you're a fan of a team, and it's especially in that first 2 or 3 rounds, there's a player you really want, and is he going to drop down to your team? Is he going to make it? And and hype, and that you don't get that. So that's why we just don't see the same interest in the CFL draft. But I'll say this, if you're one of those folks, and I kind of self-identify here, that you get into the details behind the game, what makes the game so fascinating, what strategy, what changes the strategies, what makes the coaches work for their money, then this whole CFL drafting process is just fascinating. It is, like I said, consistently fielding high-level Canadian talent is the key to victory, or one of them in the CFL. Now, unfortunately, if you do want to cover it, if you do want to watch what's going on, it's not easy to find coverage. At least scouring the web, I haven't been able to find yet anywhere that says they're definitely broadcasting this year's combine. I understand that they probably will do the same as last year, which is they'll stream some of it on the CFL Plus platform, which is the same one that you can get games outside of Canada on for free in the season. So I'm hoping US and maybe anybody from Europe that's interested will maybe be able to get on that. And I believe in Canada, it's likely preseason will be able to go on and watch it for free on there. Now, apparently they're also going to be doing daily recaps with results and other analysis on their other CFL social and on their own cfl.ca. So you can catch up to it all there. But that's not necessarily easy. I still would say it's worth going to. And then on April 29th, TSN is going to televise the first 2 rounds on their regular TSN channels on cable and carry all 8 rounds on TSN Plus. So if you've got that streaming service, you can see the whole thing. And again, if you're a bigger fan as you go along, and if you've got the time to watch these things, I would go and do them, because they really are. They're just as fascinating as watching the process down in the NFL. And it's got its own quirky little CFL moments of difference and fun to it. And sometimes you get a big surprise. I said earlier that sometimes players will get to start in their first year and do pretty good. Last year, there was a receiver called Ajoa Joe, who there was some questions about sort of, where he'd played college and what was going on with him. Looked like he had lots of talent and athletic ability, but just nobody knew for sure. The Riders ended up taking the 7th round. 7th round, you get nothing out of the 7th round. Here he is. Not only did he come on and end up starting in the last half of the season for them and making big contributions to the team, he's now signed with an NFL team, I think Minnesota, so he's down south. So in 1 year, he's gone from a 7th round CFL pick to an NFL player. Now, think about that. Come out and watch what we've got this year. See who's going to be the surprise of this year's draft. Who's going to blow up in a way that we don't expect. Anyway, I hope you'll take it in. I'll close with just sort of one quick disclaimer here. A lot of the roster rules around these spots got really convoluted during the last CBA when the CFL and the CFLPA were trying to negotiate exactly how many Canadians would still have to be on the roster and whatnot, and it got a little bit weird. So I've stuck to just the simple things here. I've kept it basic and simple. I know there's stuff where it's a little different in reality than what I said. And if any of you want to add details, put them in the comments, help people out. I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. And likewise, if you are a detail nerd, and again, I say that in the most loving way, I can fall into that category myself sometimes, you can spend an awful lot of time learning about all of these little nuances and loopholes. How some Americans can become Canadians and then not Canadians, and how that impacts, just your player management through the game, how that changes what you're having to do with where you're playing people and who you're playing. Or you can look into how quarterbacks don't have a nationality, except sometimes they do have a nationality, or like I said, sometimes a 45-man roster is a 44-man roster, or sometimes if the draft coming up, you're considered Canadian for draft purposes if your parent is Canadian, or I don't know, a bunch of other stuff like you're Canadian, your parent looks Canadian, or your parent ate maple syrup while you were pregnant. I don't know. Anyway, there's a lot of that. And that leads to something called supplemental drafts. And with all that, we still haven't even mentioned the global combine and draft. So this is just the basic of how the drafting system works. There's a lot more there. If you want to get into it, you can, like I say, spend a lot of time going down the rabbit holes. If you want to know more about some of those details and don't really want to do the research, go ahead and mention it in the comments down here. And who knows, if there's enough people interested, I can always do some of them because, I'm picked up most of the rules as I've gone along through this stuff. So that's about it. That's all I got for now. Subscribe, please. Turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any of the exciting stuff that we've got coming up for this year. Drop us a like or a comment if you're feeling generous, or if you actually really even liked it. That'd be great, And if you're listening on a podcast, please rate and review there. Remember, folks, we're getting close. Basically under a couple of months. Rookie camps open May 8th. Main camps on May 12th. And 85 days. So 2 and a bit months, a little under 3 months until the CFL kicks off its 2025 season with, I believe it's Ottawa and Regina on a Thursday night, June 5th. Almost time to embrace the chaos. I can't wait. That's about all I got. Until next time, get the hell off my lawn.